right, it is time for a book list. Hey everyone, it is Shannon, and I'm super excited to be here today and to do this video. This is going to be going through a book list. I picked a book list online, and I thought it might be fun to go through the titles and see how many we have read and not read. So this is the Penguin list of 100 must-read books chosen by readers. It is mostly of the sort of classics or modern classics variety, so it's definitely older works, but there are some newer ones, but I think the most recent one is in the 2000s. Yeah, I thought it would just be fun to go title by title, see how many we've read. You can even do a little chart. It says read, unread, and then you can do the little hash marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to see how many of you've read. I usually leave a little space on the side just in case there's something that doesn't quite fit into read or unread. And yeah, I will leave a link down below for the original article, which also has a PDF of the titles. But if you don't want to know what they are until I say them, then you can print the PDF off later, or just have it for reference. And what's really cool about the article is that it includes something from one of the people that submitted the title of why they think it is a must-read book, which I think is interesting. Because this is a long list, it's 100 titles, I'm not going to talk too much about each and every one of them because that would just be really, really, really long. So I'm going to try and keep it to just like the title, and we'll see how this goes. So the first title on the list is a very popular title and is #1 on a lot of lists, although it says that this list isn't ranked, but it does tend to be #1 on a lot of lists, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I have read this. I read this for the Those Books Exploration, and wasn't my favorite, but I did read it. Next up, we have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Definitely a very, very on a lot of lists titles. A title that's on a lot of lists. I have read this. I read this in high school, and I read it semi-recently as well. Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I read this in 2012 for the film coming out, and then I never watched the movie. Okay, I gotta just say the titles. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Okay, I will say something about this one because this is on my Goodreads TBR, and the library does not have an e-copy of this one, so this feels a bit like my White Whale. I keep on looking for it at like secondhand bookstores and stuff like that. Of course, not right now because of COVID, but yeah, I feel like I don't want to commit to buying a physical copy until I know if I want to read it or not, but it's been on my TBR forever, and I don't know if I'll ever end up reading it. So yeah, all right, now faster. So this is unread for me. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. So we have some nonfiction on the list. I haven't read this. Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. I have read this. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I haven't read this. It's on my list. There's a TV show as well. I haven't read it. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I haven't read this one, and I actually do not know too much about it, but this makes me want to read it. Looks interesting. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I've read this one. It's one of my favorites. All like classics or non-classics, it's a fave. Crime and Punishment by, is it Fyodor Dostoevsky? Not sure how to pronounce their first name. So I haven't read this. It's really long, I think. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This was all the rage when I started BookTube, and I read the first little bit of it, and I was like, I don't know if this one's for me. So it's still on my unread list, and it's on my Those Books list. I'm not sure about it, though. The Call of the Wild by Jack London. I haven't read this one. The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. So now we're getting into some quote-unquote genre fiction. Although I don't quite know what genre this would be. I have read this one, though. I forgot to say that. I have read it. Persuasion by Jane Austen. I haven't read this. This will be my next Austen if I dive back in. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I read this in 2019. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, the first book in the Narnia series. This is, I have read this. It's fantasy. There are a couple of books and series on the list. I'll try and mention them at the end if the video doesn't get too long. But I didn't go through all of the titles, but I did notice a few. To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I haven't read this, but I want to read it. The Death of the Heart by Elizabeth Bowen. I haven't read this. I haven't heard of this. I haven't even heard of it. Test of the Dubervilles by Thomas Hardy. This goes in new category for me. I'm currently reading this, so it's neither read nor unread. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this. I loved it. I love this cover too. Oh, so good. The Master and the Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. I haven't read it. I think it's sort of commentary satire. I don't know if I would get the references. It's on my Those Books list, but I have not read it. The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley. Haven't read it. Hadn't heard of it. No idea what it's about. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. Haven't read it. I've seen the movie. I always forget this was based on a book. I don't know if I would read it. I think I would find it too disturbing. 1984, George Orwell. Talk about disturbing. I haven't read this one. I need to read it. It's just ridiculous at this point that I haven't read it. Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann. Haven't read it. Haven't heard of it. Don't know anything about it. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Haven't read it. I think I've seen a film adaptation. Beloved by Toni Morrison. Haven't read it. I own this one. The Code of the Woosters by P.J. Woodhouse. Haven't read it. I think this is another one of the ones that's in a series. Yeah, Jeeves No. 7. Hadn't heard of it. Dracula by Bram Stoker. This one took me like 2 years to read, but I did finish it. I love this cover. Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have read this. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I haven't read this one. I want to research this one a bit more. I know this one is a bit of has some challenges around it. It does use the N-word, so if that's a hard no, then it's a pass. I want to research more because it is on some of my list, but I don't want to go into it not knowing some context around it. So that's, for me, that's on a sort of research more before reading list. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I haven't read this. I haven't read many Dickens. I don't know what to go to next. This is really kind of a disturbing cover. My gosh, I hope you can't hear my computer. I don't know what it's doing back there. It's being very noisy. Yeah, haven't read this one. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This is on several of my lists, I'm sure. Haven't read it. I don't know what it's about. It feels like maybe satire, commentary, social commentary. Haven't read it. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Haven't read this one, but I do want to read it. I might own it. I might. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I read this. This was hard. This was a tough read. But I did read it. Middlemarch by George Eliot. I haven't read it. All that I know about it is that it's really big. And people read it in March. Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. I almost read this when the film was coming out, and then I started it and put it aside and didn't go back to it. So, but it's on the TBR. The Iliad by Homer. Read it. I listened to an audiobook, actually. It's one of the first audiobooks I listened to. Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. I haven't read it. Another really long one. Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn. Is it Wow? Haven't read it. It's on my lists, I'm sure. Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Haven't read it. This is the first book I added to Goodreads ever. I need to read it. I put it on it over 10 years ago. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I read it. What was it in? Wasn't a fan. The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. Haven't read it. I think this was made into a film with Rutger Hauer, I think. But I haven't read it. Barchester Towers. It's reversed in the camera. Barchester's Towers by Anthony Trollope. I haven't heard of this one. I've heard of Trollope, mostly from Steve Donahue. But I haven't heard of this book in particular. Is this another one that's in the middle of a series? Not sure. Another Country by James Baldwin. Haven't read this one. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I haven't read it. This is on my near future TBR. I do have a physical copy that I'm going to split into 5 volumes, so that'll get done at some point. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Ronald Dahl. Haven't read it, not going to read it. So this has a separate category again for me. This one's a veto, unfortunately. Ronald Dahl did express anti-Semitic values, and so that's a hard pass for me. That's a no. So I read the BFG and enjoyed it, and The Witches and didn't enjoy it, both before I knew, but now that I know, unfortunately, no more. I'll leave a link for a reference for that down below. The Outsiders by C.S. Hinton. I have read this. I read this back in the day. I love the movie. And this actually, for just a slight bit of trivia, C.S. Hinton, she apparently wasn't happy with the reading choices for teens, so she wrote this in high school and created like the YA genre. So that's pretty freaking awesome. I have a very special place in my heart for this movie, and I did enjoy the book as well. So yeah, C.S. Hinton. Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Haven't read it. It's another one of the really long books on my TBR. Ulysses by James Joyce. Haven't read this one. When I was researching, I think it was said that you should read the Odyssey first, I think. So I've read that. So now I can read Ulysses. I'm very intimidated to try that one. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is another way I've seen the movie but haven't read the book. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Have not read it. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Haven't read it. I don't know if I want to read this one. Like, it's on some lists, but I don't know. And I do know some women who have liked it, but I am hesitant. And it was hard to find a cover I could share. Oops. All right, next up. Secret Garden by Frances Hodgkins Burnett. I read this for my Those Books project. Scoop by Evelyn Waugh. Hadn't heard of it. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Haven't read it. Might be my next try for Dickens. It's another long one. The Diary of a Nobody by George and Whedon Grossman. I read this in 2020. I quite enjoyed it. I was happily surprised with it. It was just perfect timing in terms of all the things, but I didn't even really know it before it ended up on a list that I had. What else do we got? Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. Haven't read it. Is on my list. The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni. Haven't heard of it, so haven't read it. Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Haven't read it. Definitely want to read it. Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure, actually. Haven't read it. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. This is the first book that I read for my sci-fi, fantasy, and weird exploration, so I have read this one. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I was actually surprised to see this one on the list. Another nonfiction, sort of philosophy, war theory type stuff. Haven't read it. I don't know if I would get something from it or not. Let me know if you've read it. I'm not sure on that one if I'd go there. I think it's public domain, so it's available. The Forsyth Saga by John Galsworthy. Haven't read it. I think I'd like family sagas, and I think this is a family saga. I don't know if this is a good place to start. Oh, I can't read that cursive backwards. Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. Another Steinbeck. Haven't heard of this one, actually. so haven't read it. Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. I haven't read it. Women in Love by DH Laurence. I haven't read it. Staying On by Paul Scott. I hadn't heard of this one. This one is another one that's in a series. It's the 5th in a series. I hadn't heard of it before this list. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. I read this. I loved it. I read it for my Those Books exploration. Loved it. Animals. I love stories with animals. Talking animals. So good. So good. My Antonia by Willa Cather. I read this for Those Books as well. Really enjoyed it. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I read this ages ago, more than 10 years ago. Didn't resonate with me. I have a hard time seeing what people see in the story. And I had a hard time understanding it. My goodness gracious. It was before I was back into reading, but it was a tough, narrative. I had a hard time understanding what was going on. Perfume, Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. I definitely want to read this one. I've seen the movie. I know that there's a TV series out now, but I would like to read it. This is another one that was hard to find a cover for without any nudity on it. It's a tough topic, though. War and Peace by Tolstoy. I read this one. Woohoo! It was a challenge to read, but I was very happy to read it, and overall I really enjoyed it. Of Human Bondage by William Somerset. I don't know how to say their last name. Maugham? This is apparently an autobiographical novel. And I did double check that that's from the author says that as well. I've never read anything like that, so curious. I am intrigued, but I haven't read it. What is my computer trying to do? Bleak House by Charles Dickens. Haven't read it. Don't think this will be my next try for Dickens because it's really long. Really long. Most of his stuff is, though. Lost Illusions by Honoré de Balzac. I hadn't heard of this. I didn't know Balzac was an author, actually. I knew them as a sort of historical figure, like a real person in history, but I didn't know that they were an author, so I don't know if this is a good place to start. I used to game when I played WoW. One of the guys in my guild, his character name was Balzac, and so and we got along really well, but he was a healer and I was a healer, so we never actually played together. That's why guild chat was awesome. Anyway, not to go on a WoW tangent, but if you've read any Balzac, do you know, is this a good place to start, or would you recommend somewhere else? So I haven't read this one. Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. Hadn't read it, hadn't heard of this one. Don't know anything about it. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I've read this one. I didn't love it. Silas Marner by George Eliot. Haven't read it. I don't know what it's about at all. Maybe that's the title character. Some of the covers looked like this. Some just had one person. Some was more situational. Don't know much about this one. Haven't read it. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I did start this one for a read-along, but I didn't stick with it. It has no chapter breaks at all, which I found really tough. So I'm going to try it again at some other point. But I don't know if this will be my next Virginia Woolf. We'll see. Little Women by Louisa M. Alcott. Read it. Didn't like it. I read it when I was a kid. I was like, nope. The Sea by Iris Murdoch. Hadn't heard of this one, but looks interesting, so it goes on the list. The Godfather by Mario Puzo. Another one where I've seen the film but haven't read the book. I was surprised to see the book on this list, but it is. The Castle by Frank Kafka. I hadn't heard of this one. I've heard of Kafka, of course, but I haven't heard of this. I don't know if it's a good place to start. I, Claudius by Robert Graves. Haven't read this one. I think it's on at least one of my lists. Peter Pan by Jan Barry. I haven't read this one. I need to research this one more. I don't know if there's problematic elements in it, so it goes on the research list. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Haven't read it. I think I had heard of it, but what could this be about? Look at that cover. I don't even know. The Razor's Edge by William Somerset Maugham. Sorry. I haven't read it. I remember the movie from this cover. I want to read it. Ooh. Lark Rise to Candleford by Flora Thompson. Haven't read it. Hadn't heard of it. The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. Hadn't heard of it. I've heard of Hardy. Of course, I've been reading other works of his. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Haven't read it. I don't know if I'd like this one. It is on my list, so I'll give it a shot. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This one I might give a pass. I've heard that it's rather dark. Haven't read it, so it might get a veto. Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South. Haven't read it. Would like to read it at some point. Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Some CanCon. I read this back in the day, so I've read this one. Sweet Française by Irene Nemirovsky. Have not heard of it. I think this is one of the newer ones. Haven't read it. I'm getting close to being out of space on my phone. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Haven't read it. Hadn't heard of it. What a Carve Up by Jonathan Coe. Hadn't heard of it. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert M. Piersig. Haven't read it. Heard of it, though. And White Nights by Dostoevsky. Love that cover. Is that it? Nope. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. That's it. That is number 100. Haven't read it. So let me know how you did. How did your tally turn out? My tally was 25 read, 1 currently reading, and 74 unread. And of those 74, I had 53 titles that I had heard of, 19 that I had never heard of, 1 that I am not going to read, which is the Roald Dahl, and 1 that I'm not sure about, which is the Heart of Darkness. And two of the unreads I have to research more, Huckleberry Finn and Peter Pan. So let me know how you did. I will leave a link down below for the article. I might leave a list of all the titles. I don't know if that might feel one step too far in the fact that this is not content I created. Let me know your thoughts on that. But I will link the article, which does have a PDF of the list, which is really awesome. I love when folks do that. And yeah, so let me know if you found this fun. Was this fun to do together? Go through lists. Would you like to see more videos like this? I had a fun time doing it, and I'm feeling not bad about 25 read to 75 unread. I don't know if that's... does that feel good? It does. Should I set my sights higher? I don't know. Maybe in a year or 2 years, those numbers will increase. Well, hopefully I'll finish Tess of the Dubervilles. Nothing else. Let me know if you could submit one book as a must-read book, what would it be? That's a good question. That's going to be our question of the day. I hope you had fun doing this, and I will be back soon in another video. Thanks so much for watching.